June 20th, 1942, southern Poland. 4 men sit inside a stolen Steyr 220 sedan in the vehicle garage of Auschwitz concentration camp. They're wearing SS uniforms that don't belong to them. They're carrying loaded pistols they took from the same warehouse where they found clothing stamped with the SS oath. Outside, SS officers walk between buildings in the summer heat, close enough to hear a raised voice, close enough to hear an engine refusing to turn over. Joseph Limpert, the group's mechanic, tries to start the vehicle, but nothing happens. The car refuses to start. Every second they sit in this garage is a second closer to someone walking through that door, seeing 4 guard strangers wearing officers' tunics that hang too loosely on starved frames, and asking a question with no safe answer. If a real SS officer walks in right now, 4 men die in this garage. Limpert tries again. Nothing. Third attempt. The engine starts, holds, settles into an idle that sounds like a second chance. He puts the car in gear and rolls onto the camp road, toward the front gate of the most efficient killing operation in human history. In roughly 90 seconds, either the barrier rises and 4 prisoners drive to freedom, or a sentry looks too closely at the hollow cheeks beneath those officers' caps, and this ends the way everything ends at Auschwitz. But to understand how 4 starving men ended up behind the windshield of a commandant's staff car, dressed as the enemy, attempting the most brazen escape in the camp's history, you need to head to June 20th, 1940. To the day a 20-year-old Polish scout named Kazimierz Piechowski walked through these same gates in the other direction. Piechowski arrived as prisoner number 918. His crime was membership in the Polish Scouting Association, which the German occupation authorities had correctly identified as a pipeline for resistance-minded young men with survival training and a stubborn loyalty to a country that was supposed to no longer exist. The camp was 6 weeks old. It would eventually process 1.3 million people through its gates and murder approximately 1.1 million of them. But in the summer of 1940, it was a converted Polish army barracks with a few thousand prisoners, a perimeter of electrified wire, and an SS garrison still refining its methods. Most prisoners who arrived in those first months didn't survive long. Starvation, beatings, arbitrary execution, disease that swept through overcrowded blocks like fire, forced labor designed to extract maximum output from a body and then discard it. Block 11, the punishment block, had standing cells 90 centimeters square where men died on their feet, and a courtyard wall so routinely used for shootings, the bricks were cratered with bullet holes. Roll calls lasted for hours. Anyone who collapsed was beaten, sometimes fatally. But this wasn't dysfunction. This was design. Reduce human beings to numbers, then to nothing. Piechowski survived it, not by luck, but by doing the one thing the system wasn't calibrated to detect. He watched, not the glazed stare of a man enduring his own destruction, but the systematic, trained observation of someone raised in the Polish Scouts to read hostile terrain the way a cartographer reads a map. Feature by feature, pattern by pattern, filing every detail that might matter when it mattered most. Over 2 years, he built a complete operational blueprint of Auschwitz inside his head, guard rotations and the precise moments when they overlapped, shift changes at the main gate, and the brief windows of inattention they created, which sentries checked paperwork and which relied on a glance and rank insignia when supply trucks arrived and departed, where the motor pool stored its vehicles, and most critically, where the SS clothing warehouse kept its uniforms and weapons. Nothing was written down. Paper could be found in a search. Everything stayed in memory, a layered map of the camp's daily rhythms, its blind spots, its structural weak points. He filed the human patterns too, which guards were thorough, which were lazy, which could be predicted. He didn't yet know what he would do with this information. There was no plan, no team, and no timeline. He only understood that a man who comprehended the machine had a better chance of surviving it than one who didn't. And the machine was changing. What had started as a brutal political detention camp was becoming something the world had never seen. And that transformation was about to reveal a vulnerability that 2 years of patient observation had positioned Piechowski perfectly to exploit. In September 1941, Deputy Commandant Karl Fritsch ordered an experiment. Roughly 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 256 inmates were sealed in the basement of Block 11. Zyklon B, hydrogen cyanide in pellet form, was pumped through the ventilation shafts. Everyone inside was dead within hours. Commandant Rudolf Haas approved the method for industrial scale. 3 kilometers away, construction accelerated at Auschwitz II, Birkenau, a sprawling new facility purpose-built for mass extermination. The transports from across occupied Europe were increasing. The selections on the platform had begun, left to labor, right to the gas. The crematoria were being designed to process thousands of bodies per day. Piechowski, prisoner 918, was now an old number in a camp where most faces changed every few weeks. And the blueprint he'd spent 2 years constructing was suggesting a specific exit, not a tunnel. The watchtowers covered every meter of perimeter, not the fence. Electrified, instantly lethal. Not a supply truck. Outgoing vehicles were searched. What his map suggested was simpler and more insane than any of the other options. The front gate, through the door every SS officer walked through every day, in plain sight. Here's what he understood that most prisoners couldn't bring themselves to think about clearly enough to act on. The SS system ran on obedience, absolute, reflexive, unquestioning obedience to rank. A private didn't question a sergeant didn't delay an officer's vehicle. The entire apparatus, the salutes, the uniforms, the rigid hierarchy, existed to make authority visible and compliance instantaneous, which meant the front gate of Auschwitz was not really secured by guards. It was secured by a habit. Wear the right uniform, carry yourself with the right posture, speak with the right voice, and the barrier would rise. The sentry would salute, not because he'd checked your papers or verified your face, because he'd been trained since basic training to obey the costume without a moment of independent thought. The plan crystallized around that single insight. The system's greatest strength was also its most exploitable weakness. But he needed 3 things he didn't have: SS uniforms, a running vehicle, and men he could trust with his life. All 3 had to materialize inside a facility designed to make unauthorized movement of any kind virtually impossible. And he needed them soon, because one of the men who would join his escape was running out of time. The men came together through the grim arithmetic of the camp. Stanislaw Gustav Jaster was facing imminent death. Whether a punishment detail or a selection list, the specifics vary across sources, but the math was the same. He had days, not weeks. His desperation compressed the timeline from someday to now. Joseph Limpard was a mechanic who could start and drive a car even if it fought him, a skill that would prove more critical than any of them imagined. Eugenius Bendera, a Ukrainian, completed the group. 4 men, 4 uniforms they hadn't yet stolen, 1 car they hadn't yet touched, 1 gate nobody had ever bluffed through. They planned in whispers during work details, in the barracks after dark, and the seconds between guard patrols where a sentence could pass mouth to ear unheard. Nothing was written down. They rehearsed the SS officer's walk, shoulders back, chin level, the stride of a man who owns the ground beneath his boots. They memorized every piece of the uniform because a single error would kill all 4 of them. Tunic, belt with the buckle stamped, "My honor is loyalty." Boots, cap with the Totenkopf death's head centered on the front. Collar tabs showing rank. A cap tilted wrong, a buckle facing the wrong direction, insignia out of place. Any of it could catch a trained eye and end everything before they reached the car. June 20th, 1942. 2 years to the day since Piechowski's arrival. The morning begins like every other. Pre-dawn roll call, work assignments, summer light. The smell every survivor would describe for the rest of their lives. Smoke, disinfectant, decay. The four men break from their routines and move toward the SS warehouse. This is the point of no return. The instant they enter that building with intent to steal, they are dead if caught. There's no reduced sentence for a prisoner found inside an SS storage facility holding officers' tunics and loaded pistols. There's only the wall. They move fast. Piechowski's 2 years of observation pay off in seconds. He knows the layout, knows where the uniforms hang, knows the weapons rack. They strip off the prisoner stripes. They dress in SS field gray, tunics buttoned, belts cinched over stomachs that haven't seen a full meal in 2 years. Caps adjusted, pistols holstered. They check each other with the precision of men performing surgery on their own futures. Collar tab straight, shoulder boards aligned, death's head on the cap centered. The uniforms hang loose on their starved frames, but not so loose that a glance from 20 feet would catch the difference. They're betting their lives that nobody looks closer than that 20 feet. They open the door and step outside, into the open compound of Auschwitz. Broad daylight, armed, dressed as the enemy. The walk from the warehouse to the garage crosses ground shared with dozens of real SS personnel, officers between buildings, guards on patrol, administrative staff. Any one of them could look up, see four unfamiliar faces, and ask a question with no safe answer. The four men can't hurry. They can't cluster together. They can't look anywhere except straight ahead with the bored confidence of officers heading somewhere routine. They walk like men who belong. Nobody stops them. They reach the garage. They climb to the stair 220, and the engine won't start. Limpert turns the key. Nothing. Second attempt. Nothing. Each failed ignition is a countdown. Third attempt, the engine catches. Limpert eases the car onto the camp road, past the barracks, past prisoners and stripes shuffling under guard. Nobody stops them. The car moves at the unhurried pace of authority toward the main gate. The barrier's down. A sentry stands at the checkpoint. The car stops. The guard steps forward, and Piechowski, prisoner 918, 2 years in stripes, 22 years old, opens his mouth and becomes someone else entirely. The voice that comes out is pure officer-class fury, Prussian, clipped, the voice of a man who will make a gate guard's career short if that barrier doesn't rise immediately. It's the voice the SS trained every enlisted man to obey without thinking. The guard snaps to attention, heels together, arm up, barrier raised. The car passes through the front gate of Auschwitz and accelerates south. For several minutes, nobody in the car speaks. The watchtowers shrink in the mirrors. The barbed wire vanishes. The road opens into farmland, villages, ordinary Polish countryside baking in June heat. The smell changes. Summer grass, dust, air that carries no ash. For the first time in 2 years, there's no fence in any direction. They drive roughly 50 miles toward the Beskin Mountains before the fuel runs dry. They abandon the car on a rural road, strip off the uniforms, and disappear into the resistance network maintained by the Polish Home Army. Sheltering an escaped Auschwitz prisoner meant death for the entire household. People helped anyway. Back at the camp, the sirens wail. Lockdown. Head count. 4 missing. Warehouse uniforms gone. Weapons gone. Garage, staff car, gone. The guards confirm an SS vehicle passed through that morning, waved through by the sentry on duty. The picture assembles into a catastrophe. 4 prisoners stole SS uniforms and weapons, commandeered a vehicle, and drove out the front gate while the sentry saluted them through. The most humiliating breach in the camp's history. Pursuit teams deploy. Dogs, roadblocks, Gestapo alerts across the region. They find nothing. The 4 men reach the underground and vanish. The prisoners left behind paid. Collective punishment after escapes was standard at Auschwitz. Men from the escapees' block selected for starvation cells, the standing bunker, the black wall. Piechowski knew this price would be extracted. He carried that weight for the rest of his life. All 4 escapees joined the Home Army and fought in the resistance. Then came August 1st, 1944, the Warsaw Uprising. 63 days of brutal urban combat as the Home Army tried to liberate the capital before the Soviets could impose their own order. Piechowski fought in it and survived. Jaster, the man whose approaching death had forced the escape's timeline, the man who had walked out of Auschwitz in a stolen SS uniform, was killed in the street fighting. He survived a death camp. He didn't survive the battle for his own city. For Piechowski, the cruelties weren't finished. Poland's post-war communist government, installed by Moscow, classified the Home Army as enemies of the state. The man who had outsmarted the SS was thrown into a communist prison. Different guards, same bars. He'd escaped one totalitarian system by impersonating its officers. Now, a second totalitarian system punished him for resisting the first. He was eventually released. He settled in Gdansk and said nothing about what he'd done. Because under communist rule, the story of a Home Army hero was politically radioactive. The most audacious escape in the history of Auschwitz sat locked inside one man's memory for decades. In 1989, communism fell, and Piechowski, now in his 70s, began to speak. Schools, universities, memorial ceremonies at the camp itself. He described what it felt like to button an SS tunic over 2 years of starvation. What it felt like to walk through a death camp disguised as one of the killers. What it felt like when the barrier went up. He died on December 15th, 2017, at 98 years old. The Auschwitz State Museum has documented roughly 802 escape attempts from the camp complex. About 144 succeeded. The rest were captured and killed. Piechowski's remains the most brazen of the 144. 4 starving men in stolen uniforms, driving a stolen car through the front gate while the guards saluted. The SS built Auschwitz on one principle: obedience must be absolute, instantaneous, and unthinking. That principle made the camp function. It made the selections efficient, the gas chambers orderly, the killing systematic. And on one June afternoon in 1942, it lifted the barrier, snapped a salute, and held the gate open while 4 prisoners drove to freedom.